It's as far as the eye can see. For the current fiscal year, 2018-2019, the deficit is likely to be just under $15 billion. Then it will spike deeper for the next 2 years before easing to just under $10 billion by 2023-2024.
These are small deficits, so as you go forward, we have a $2 trillion economy, so when you're looking at 1% or less of GDP, these are not significant amounts of deficit.
But Morneau and the entire Liberal Party is betting that most Canadians do not care that much about those relatively small deficits.
I think Canadians will look at that and say, this government has delivered exactly what we promised that we would deliver, more success for more middle-class Canadians than ever before.
Indeed, the government is betting its electoral fortunes this fall that Canadians will support a bevy of new spending programs in this budget. There will be rebates for those buying electric and other zero-emission vehicles, cost $600 million. Boosting the country's internet infrastructure, $717 million. More money for municipalities to build local infrastructure, $2.2 billion. Seniors who want to keep working will have less of their guaranteed income supplement clawed back, $1.8 billion. Students will get a break with lower interest rates on student loans, $1.8 billion. And the Liberals will take some baby steps towards a national farmer care program, cost $1 billion. There's also a new program to help Canadians get new job skills and a new program to help make it easier for first-time homebuyers. Add it all up, and that's more than $22.8 billion in new spending over the next 6 years. And yet, despite all that, there was not a lot in today's budget for everyday Canadians or small business owners.
Probably won't be a big difference from an individual perspective, just because of the fact that there are very few measures on the tax front or really on the spending front.
Of course, most of the spending announced in today's budget will not actually get spent until after the next election. And so the message is clear. The Liberals will campaign on this budget. And Liberals will be saying, re-elect us, and we'll continue with these new spending programs. Elect someone else, and these spending programs just might be at risk. Now, here's my colleague Abigail Beeman with more on today's budget.
Marina Calhoun just bought this downtown Toronto condo.
Frustrating, exhausting, challenging, yeah, all of the above.
At 36, she saved for years to get here and had to change her home ownership goal from a detached house to...
In one bedroom wasn't even possible. I had to go for a 2-bedroom and have a roommate in order to be able to afford the monthly mortgage payments.
She considers herself one of the lucky ones. Even her younger brother thinks he'll never own a home. And it's millennials like them the government is targeting with new incentives for first-time home buyers. The incentive will cut monthly mortgage payments by offering a 5 or 10% shared equity mortgage from the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation. On a $400,000 home, the government says your monthly payment will drop by more than $225. That will cost $1.25 billion over 3 years and applies to those with a household income under $120,000. The Liberals are also increasing the amount first-time homebuyers can borrow from their RRSPs from $25,000 to $35,000.
The problem is once prices adjust for that, we'll just simply see higher prices. And so a year from now, those folks trying to get into the market will find it just as difficult as folks today. And that's the real danger, is that there's no shortcut to high house prices.
Another focus in this budget, skills training, helping not just young Canadians get into the job market, but older workers to upgrade their skills. The government is offering a refundable tax credit, $250 a year, up to $5,000 over your career, that can be used for training at colleges and universities. They're also offering a new EI benefit that lets people take up to 4 weeks paid leave over 4 years and make sure your job is there when you get back.
It's not going to, ramp up growth tomorrow or anything like that, but it addresses, a key long-term trend, which is shifting requirements, shifting skills needs. We know the economy of 10, 20 years from now is going to look different from the economy of today.
But that money for training isn't likely to get you much further ahead financially, as the cost of tuition has jumped each year in Canada about the same amount as that $250 proposed tax credit. Abigail Beeman, Global News, Ottawa.
Thanks, Abigail. Now, I want to explain a little bit about the unique way we presented the 2019 federal budget to you this afternoon. We've had to present it in this unique way because of procedural hanky-panky on both sides, on the opposition side and on the government side today. Right now in the House of Commons, you're looking at a vote that's happening. It started about 10 minutes ago on a motion coming from a Senate bill that has to do with fisheries. It has nothing to do with the budget. Normally, of course, if you've ever followed a budget presentation, at 4 p.m. on Budget Day, the Finance Minister stands up in the House of Commons, delivers the budget speech, and the budget is out there for public consumption. That has not happened yet. We're still waiting for Finance Minister Bill Morneau to deliver the budget speech in the House of Commons. Here's why this got this way. Earlier today, at the House of Commons Justice Committee, Liberal MPs prevented a motion from the opposition to have Jody Wilson-Raybould, the former Attorney General, testify about the SNC Lavalin matter. That angered the opposition that meeting essentially had been shut down. And so the opposition parties signaled earlier on they were going to engage in some procedural tactics to delay or prevent Bill Morneau from delivering the budget speech. Well, the Liberals had some tactics up their sleeves as well. They simply walked into the House of Commons shortly before 4 o'clock and tabled the budget on the desk of the parliamentary clerk. So it became a part of the parliamentary record, even with nobody speaking to it, and as a result, we could all start talking about what's in the budget now. I'll tell you what's going on right now in the House of Commons, what the particular procedural delay is. It's called a slow vote. So normally all MPs sort of stand up all in a row and get counted off and read off. This is the Conservatives right now. They're trying to delay things, prevent the Finance Minister from speaking. And so you're seeing Mr. Arnold as he stands up, and then he'll sit down. Mr. Doherty, as he stands up, sits down. Mr. Gourd, he stands up to vote and sits down, and so on and so on and so on. There's 338 members of the House, about 170 of them are on the opposition side, and so you can see this slow vote process means a vote can take a long time. What's likely to happen after this vote, which is on some government business, government business number 27, is I expect you will see the opposition make a motion to adjourn the House. In other words, end the day's proceedings without any more activity. There would be no Finance Minister's speech. The opposition is going to lose that vote, but there has to be another vote on what's called an adjournment. And so we will see more slow voting from the opposition, more delays. When will Finance Minister Bill Morneau get to give his budget speech in the House of Commons? It could be a little while. Stay tuned online, and we'll be sure to bring it when that happens. I'm David Aiken in the House of Commons foyer in the nation's capital.
Mr. Sopak.
Mr. Sopak.
Mr. Van Kesteren.
Van Kesteren.
Mr. Shipley.
Mr. Shipley.
Mr. Iglinski.
Mr. Iglinski.
Mr. Miller, Bruce Gray, Owen Sound.
Mr. Miller, Bruce Gray, Owen Sound.
Mr. Trost.
Mr. Trost.
All those opposed to the motion will please rise.
Monsieur Trudeau.
Monsieur Trudeau.
Mr. Hare.
Mr. Hare.
Ms. Wilson-Raybould.
Ms. Wilson-Raybould.
Mr. Sajan.
Mr. Sajan.
Madame Joly.
Madame Joly.
Mr. Goodale.
Mr. Goodale.
Mr. Rodriguez.
Mr. Rodriguez.
Ms. Pettit-Taylor.
Ms. Pettit-Taylor.
Ms. Murray.
Ms. Murray.
Monsieur Leblanc.
Monsieur Leblanc.
Ms. Chager.
Ms. Chager.
Ms. Qualtrough.
Ms. Qualtrough.
Mr. Morneau.
Mr. Morneau.
Ms. Freeland.
Ms. Freeland.
Mr. Lemetti.
Mr. Lemetti.
Mr. Macaulay-Cardigan.
Mr. Macaulay-Cardigan.
Ms. Bennett.
Ms. Bennett.
Mr. Baines.
Mr. Baines.
Ms. Haidu.
Ms. Haidu.
Mr. Hussein.
Mr. Hussein.
Mr. O'Regan.
Mr. O'Regan.
Mr. Blair.
Mr. Blair.
Ms. Tassie.
Ms. Tassie.
Ms. Ing.
Ms. Ing.
Mrs. Jordan.
Mrs. Jordan.
Mrs. Philpott.
Mrs. Philpott.
Ms. Mahichuk.
Ms. Mahichuk.
Mr. Casey Cumberland Colchester.
Mr. Casey Cumberland Colchester.
Mr. Easter.
Mr. Easter.
Ms. Fry.
Ms. Fry.
Mr. McKay.
Mr. McKay.
Mr. Nault.
Mr. Nault.
Mrs. Lockhart.
Mrs. Lockhart.
Mr. Lausanne, Jean-Pierre, La Petite Nation.
Mr. Lausanne, Argentin, La Petite Nation.
Mr. Cormier.
Mr. Cormier.
Mrs. McCrimmon.
Mrs. McCrimmon.
Ms. Jones.
Ms. Jones.
Mr. Algabra.
Mr. Algabra.
Mr. Carr.
Mr. Carr.
Ms. Gould.
Ms. Gould.
Mr. Sohi.
Mr. Sohi.
Mr. Holland.
Mr. Holland.
Mr. Champagne.
Mr. Champagne.
Ms. Monsef.
Ms. Monsef.
Mr. Garneau.
Mr. Garneau.
Ms. Duncan Etobicoke North.
Ms. Duncan Etobicoke North.
Ms. McKenna.
Ms. McKenna.
Madame Le Boutillier.
Madame Le Boutillier.
Mr. Wilkinson.
Mr. Wilkinson.
Mr. Cuzner.
Mr. Cuzner.
Mr. Casey Charlottetown.
Mr. Casey Charlottetown.
Mr. Vaughan.
Mr. Vaughan.
Monsieur Serry.
Monsieur Serry.
Mr. Miller, Ville-Marie, le Sud-Ouest et les Sœurs.
Mr. Miller, Ville-Marie, le Sud-Est et les Sœurs.
Monsieur Schiefke.
Mr. Schiefke.
Ms. Gros.
Ms. Gros.
Mr. Eiking.
Mr. Eiking.
Mr. Bagnall.
Mr. Bagnall.
Monsieur Paradis.
Mr. Paradis.
Mr. McGinty.
Mr. McGinty.
Mr. Scarpaleggia.
Mr. Scarpaleggia.
Mr. Ananda Sangari.
Mr. Anand Sangari.
Mr. Fillmore.
Fillmore.
Mr. Massé, Avignon, la Métis, Matane, Matapédia.
Mr. Massé, Avignon, le Métis, Matane.
Ms. Goldsmith-Jones.
Ms. Goldsmith-Jones.
Ms. DeMoss.
Ms. DeMoss.
Monsieur Lefebvre.
Monsieur Lefebvre.
Mr. Mendicino.
Mr. Mendicino.
Monsieur Duguid.
Mr. Duguid.
Mr. Lamoureux.
Mr. Lamoureux.
Mr. McKinnon-Gatineau.
Mr. McKinnon-Gatineau.
Mr. Beach.
Mr. Beach.
Mr. Lightbound.
Mr. Lightbound.
Ms. O'Connell.
Ms. O'Connell.
Ms. Cara.
Ms. Cara.
Mr. Verani.
Mr. Verani.
Mr. Fraser, Central Nova.
Mr. Fraser, Central Nova.
Monsieur Vandal.
Monsieur Vandal.
Monsieur Poisson.
Monsieur Poisson.
Mr. De Courcy.
Mr. De Courcy.
Mrs. Romanado.
Mrs. Romanado.
Monsieur Hébert.
Monsieur Hébert.
Mr. Sims.
Mr. Sims.
Ms. Ratanzi.
Mr. Ratanzi.
Mr. Jesnevsky.
Mr. Jesnevsky.
Mr. Dhaliwal.
Dhaliwal.
Mr. Pesky-Salido.
Pascal Salido.
Madame Mendez.
Madame Mendez.
Mr. Oliphant.
Mr. Oliphant.
Mr. Dubourg.
Mr. Dubourg.
Mr. Aldeg.
Mr. Aldeg.
Mr. Amos.
Amos.
Mr. Arsenault.
Mr. Arsenault.
Mr. Aria.
Mr. Aria.
Mr. Ayoub.
Mr. Ayoub.
Mr. Badaway.
Mr. Badaway.
Madame Lapointe.
Madame Lapointe.
Mr. Biddle.
Mr. Biddle.
Mr. Bayliss.
Mr. Bayliss.
Mr. Boissonneau.
Mr. Boissonneau.
Mr. Bossio.
Mr. Bossio.
Mr. Bertina.
Mr. Bettina.
Mr. Breton.
Mr. Breton.
Mrs. Caesar Chavan.
Mrs. Caesar
Mr.
Chavan.
Chen.
Mr. Chen.
Mr. Bruson.
Mr. Bruson.
Ms. Dillon.
Ms. Dillon.
Mr. Drouin.
Mr. Drouin.
Ms. Zerowitz.
Ms. Zerowitz.
Mr. Assassi.
Mr. Assassi.
Mr. El Khoury.
Mr. El Khoury.
Mr. Ellis.
Mr. Ellis.
Mr. Eliofson.
Mr. Elson.
Mr. Fergus.
Mr. Fergus.
Mr. Finnegan.
Mr. Finnegan.
Mr. Fisher.
Mr. Fisher.
Mr. Fonseca.
Mr. Fonseca.
Mr. Fragascatos.
Mr. Fragascatos.
Mr. Fraser Westnova.
Mr. Fraser Westnova.
Mr. Fuhr.
Mr. Fuhr.
Mr. Garrettson.
Garrettson.
Mr. Graham.
Mr. Graham.
Mr. Hardy.
Mr. Hardy.
Mr. Harvey.
Mr. Harvey.
Mr. Housefather.
Mr. Housefather.
Ms. Hutchings.
Hutchings.
Mr. Yacono.
Mr. Yacono.
Ms. Khalid.
Ms. Khalid.
Mr. Levitt.
Mr. Levitt.
Mr. Long.
Mr. Long.
Mr. Longfield.
Mr. Longfield.
Ms. Ludwig.
Ms. Ludwig.
Mr. Maloney.
Mr. Maloney.
Mr. May Cambridge.
Mr. May Cambridge.
Mr. McDonald.
Mr. McDonald.
Mr. McKinnon Coquitlam Port Coquitlam.
Mr. McKinnon, Coquitlam.
Mr. McLeod Northwest Territories.
McLeod, Northwest Territories.
Mr. Morrissey.
Mr. Morrissey.
Madame Nassif.
Madame Nassif.
Mr. Oliver.
Oliver.
Mr. Wallet.
Mr. Wallet.
Mr. Peterson.
Peterson.
Mr. Picard.
Mr. Picard.
Mr. Rioux.
Mr. Rioux.
Mr. Robillard.
Mr. Robillard.
Ms. Rudd.
Ms. Rudd.
Mr. Rumi.
Mr. Rumi.
Mr. Rusnak.
Mr. Rusnak.
Ms. Sahota.
Ms. Sahota.
Mr. Saini.
Mr. Saini.
Mr. Sanson.
Mr. Sanson.
Mr. Sanga.
Mr. Sanga.
Mr. Sarai.
Mr. Sarai.
Madame Shanahan.
Shanahan.
Mr. Sheehan.
Mr. Sheehan.
Mr. Sidhu Mission Masquerade Fraser Canyon.
Mr. Sidhu Mission Masquerade Fraser Canyon.
Ms. Sidhu Brampton South.
Ms. Sidhu Brampton South.
Mr. Secan.
Mr. Secan.
Mr. Sorbera.
Mr. Sorbera.
Mr. Spangeman.
Mr. Spangeman.
Mr. Tabera.
Mr. Tabara.
Mr. Tan.
Mr. Tan.
Ms. Vandenbell.
Ms. Vandenberg.
Mr. Whalen.
Mr. Whalen.
Mrs. Zaid.
Mrs. Zaid.
Madame Fortier.
Madame Fortier.
Madame Lambropoulos.
Madame Lambropoulos.
Mr. Hogue.
Mr. Hogue.
Mr. Rogers.
Mr. Rogers.
Ms. Yep.
Ms. Yip.
Madame Bendayan.
Madame Bendayan.
Mr. Rota.
Mr. Rota.
Mr. Julian.
Mr. Julian.
Mr. Massey Windsor West.
Mr. Massey Windsor West.
Mr. Bouleris.
Mr. Bulleris.
Ms. Benson.
Ms. Benson.
Ms. Kwan.
Ms. Kwan.
Mr. Angus.
Angus.
Mr. Davies.
Mr. Davies.
Ms. Ramsey.
Ms. Ramsey.
Mr. Caron.
Mr. Caron.
Mr. Garrison.
Mr. Garrison.
Madame Brosseau.
Madame Brousseau.
Madame Trudel.
Madame Trudel.
Madame Sans Souci.
Madame Sans Souci.
Miss Blaney, North Island, Powell River.
Lady North Island Powell River.
Miss Jolibois.
Miss Jolibois.
Monsieur Dussault.
Monsieur Dussault.
Monsieur Dubé.
Monsieur Dubé.
Monsieur Aubin.
Monsieur Aubin.
Monsieur Nantel.
Monsieur Nantel.
Monsieur Choquette.
Mr. Choquette.
Mr. Blakey.
Mr. Blakey.
Mr. Duval.
Mr. Duval.
Mr. Cannings.
Mr. Cannings.
Mr. Johns.
Mr. Johns.
Miss Hardcastle.
Miss Hardcastle.
Mr. McGregor.
Mr. McGregor.
Mr. Cullen.
Mr. Cullen.
Mr. Rankin.
Mr. Rankin.
Mr. Stetsky.
Mr. Stetsky.
Madame Quash.
Madame Quash.
Madame Boutin-Sweet.
Madame Boutin.
Madame Laverdière.
Madame Laverdière.
Mr. Christopherson.
Mr. Christopherson.
Ms. Duncan Edmonton Strathcona.
Duncan Edmonton Strathcona.
Mr. Donnelly.
Mr. Donnelly.
Ms. Matheson.
Matheson.
Madame Hughes.
Madame Hughes.
Mr. Nuttall. Oh, well,
He's already leaving.
yeah, it's okay. Monsieur Beaulieu.
Mr. Beaulieu.
Monsieur Plamondon.
Monsieur Plamondon.
Monsieur Boudriat.
Monsieur Boudria.
Monsieur Sainte-Marie.
Monsieur Sainte-Marie.
Madame Posé.
Madame Posé.
Monsieur Fortin.
Monsieur Fortin.
Madame Gill.
Madame Gill.
Monsieur Barsalou-Duzel.
Monsieur Barcelou.
Ms. May-Sanish-Garfalin.
May Salish-Garfalin.
Monsieur Bernier.
Monsieur Bernier.
Mr. Tutu.
Mr. Tutu.
Mr. Kong.
Mr. Kong.
Mr. Clement.
Mr. Clement.
Mr. Greywall.
Mr. Greywall.
Mr. Doherty.
Mr. Doherty.
Mr. Barlow.
Mr. Barlow.
Mr. Warkington.
Mr. Walkington.
Mrs. Vecchio.
Mrs. Vecchio.
Mrs. Cousy.
Mrs. Cousy.
Madame Boucher.
Madame Boucher.
Mrs. Falk Battleford's Lord Minster.
Mrs. Falk, Bedford's Minster.
Mr. Kitchen.
Mr. Kitchen.
Mr. Vierson.
Mr. Vierson.
Mr. O'Toole.
Mr. O'Toole. 85, 85. Nays, contre, 235, 235.
Declare the motion defeated. The honourable member for Barrie Springwater or Dante is rising on a point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I actually voted both for and in favor, and against. And I just wanted to apologize to the House for that, but also just wanted to say let her speak.
Member for Caribou Prince George is rising on a point of order.
Mr. Speaker, unfortunately there was confusion at the beginning. I voted both for and against, Mr. Speaker. Had I been at the committee this morning, I would have voted to allow our former Attorney General to speak. On this vote, I'm voting for.
Member for Grant Barrie Mackenzie.
Speaker, I do want to clarify my vote. Had I been at the committee this morning, I would have voted against the cover-up. In terms of this motion, I support the motion.
Foothills.
I want to clarify my vote. I voted both for and against. It is a protest on my behalf for this cover-up. I think you should let her speak, and the government should be ashamed of their attitude today.
Debate. The honourable member for Calgary Nose Hill.
Mr. Speaker, I like unanimous consent of the House to allow my vote to let her speak.
Does the honourable member have unanimous consent? No, there's no unanimous consent. The honourable member for Durham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I understand that I may have voted twice in that last vote. I appreciate the fact, Mr. Speaker, that you are recognizing me and allowing my voice to speak, to allow me to clarify the record, to have me recorded as yay. Allowing someone to speak allows for clarity and sunshine, Mr. Speaker. Let her speak.
Allowing points of order, I encourage members not to engage in debate during points of order. A member for Elgin, Middlesex, London, order.
Speaker, the former Attorney General has not been able to speak, and she deserves to speak.
Exactly.
I would like to stand here.
Let her speak.
Perhaps did not hear what I just said, that members should not engage in debate on the points of order. They're standing up, so I'd ask her to get to a point of order quickly.
What I'd like to do then is voice my opinion on this, and I will be supporting this motion. Please remove me from the names.
Member for Prince Albert.
There may be confusion. I voted twice. I'm voting in favor of this. But I also think it's very important, Mr. Speaker, that people are allowed to speak. So please.
Honourable member for Calgary Midnapore.
Mr. Speaker, I would also like to apologize. I believe that I voted both for and against, but I will always vote for the opportunity for women to have the opportunity to speak and for the former Attorney General to have the
Debate. The honourable member for Battleford's Lloydminster.
I want to apologize as well. I believe I voted twice on this matter. But with the confusion of the House these past couple days and the confusion of who's allowed to speak, who's not allowed to speak, so I would like my vote to stand as yes and let her speak. Thank you.
The honourable member for Surrey Moose Mountain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I too want to apologize. Apparently I voted twice. I want to register my vote that I voted in favor of this. I apparently was distracted by this document, and I believe it's important to point out that not only was I distracted, but the people at committee this morning were distracted on voting to let her speak.
Monsieur le Président, je voudrais m'excuser, j'ai voté 2 fois. Je voterai pour cette motion-là parce que je suis une femme et j'ai le droit de parole. Donc aujourd'hui, laissez-la parler.
The honourable member for Peace River Westlaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to clarify my vote as well. I would be supporting this motion, but I would also support the motion to let her speak. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Milton is rising on a question of privilege. Before I go to her, which I will do, I want to note first that, of course, this relates. I've noticed there's a number of questions of privilege that relate to matters in committee. Normally, the Speaker does not get involved in matters of committee. Secondly, of course, there is an order of the House to have something happen at this time. So I would ask her to focus on why, in this case, the Speaker should be involved, could get involved. And of course, do so briefly.
What about the vote? I appreciate your advice
twice, and I'm sure you'll determine where you want to cut me off and stop me from speaking. Mr. Speaker, I rise today on a question of privilege concerning an egregious leak of proceedings at the Standing Committee on the Justice and Human Rights today. As required by the rules and practices of this House, I'm rising it now at the earliest possible opportunity. This morning, Mr. Speaker, Liberal staff circulated to media assembled outside of our committee meeting a motion which was being put forward without notice, or table dropped as it's called, at the committee meeting. This motion was part of the Liberal effort to change the channel on the SNC-Lavalin scandal, which has been consuming the government, forcing them into a massive damage control effort. Of course, this move was not surprising, given that the Liberal members of the Justice Committee last night signaled in a letter to the committee chair, that was quite shocking, that they were shutting down the Justice Committee hearings. To put it simply, Liberal staff should not have been circulating this channel-changing motion while we were in the midst of learning about it inside the committee room. Often the House has heard complaints about the leak of draft committee reports. However, the secrecy of in-camera committee proceedings is just not applicable to draft reports. Citation 57 of Beauchene's Parliamentary Rules and Forms 6 editions tells us the following, quote, "The House has been, in the past, regarded the publication of the proceedings or reports of committees sitting in camera to be a breach of privilege," end quote. Pages 1089 and 1090 of the House of Commons Procedure and Practice 3rd edition states, "Divulging any part of the proceedings of an in-camera committee meeting has been ruled by the Speaker to constitute a prima facie matter of privilege," end quote. The associated footnote refers to a ruling of Mr. Speaker Fraser on March 14, 1987, at page 6108 of the debates concerning the leak of a committee vote. As part of his finding of a prima facie case of privilege, your predecessor said, "I believe it is my duty on your behalf to state in categoric terms that when a committee resolves to meet in camera, all deliberations which take place at such meeting, including any votes which might be recorded, are intended to be confidential. All members attending such a meeting, together with any members of staff assisting the committee, are expected to respect the confidentiality of the proceedings which take place at that meeting. This place can only operate on the basis of respect for its rules and practice and of confidence and trust among its members," end quote. The matter was referred to the former Standing Committee on Elections, Privileges and Procedure, which considered the matter. That committee said of the following in its 7th report at paragraphs 8 and 10. "An in-camera meeting is one which occurs behind closed doors. It is a confidential meeting in that the public is excluded. Your committee firmly believes in the value of importance of in-camera meetings to committees of the House. This practice allows committees a measure of independence and enhances the collegiality of members, something which is necessary to effective committee work. The success of an in-camera meeting depends upon their privacy. Their confidentiality must be respected by all involved, and without this respect, the work of all committees would be seriously imperiled to the detriment of the House and all members. When a committee chooses to meet in camera, all matters are confidential. Any departure from strict confidentiality should be by explicit committee decision, which should deal with what matters may be published, in which form, and by whom. Committees should make clear decisions about the circulation of draft reports, the disposition of evidence, and the publication of their minutes. Equally, committees should give careful consideration to the matters that should be dealt with in camera and matters that should be discussed in public," end quote. Now, normally committee problems are left for committees.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Chilliwack-Hope, I will note, of course, that questions privilege are normally heard at a certain time, either at the beginning of the day or after question period. Now, member for Chilliwack-Hope is rising on a point of order.
Mr. Speaker, many critical points are being made by my colleague, and due to the noise coming from the Liberal side, I can't even hear the member. I'm sitting right beside her, so I'd ask that you bring the House to order.
I am grateful to the honourable member for Chilliwack-Hope for his interest in decorum, and I trust that will continue in the future. The honourable member from Milton, who I'd ask to sum up.
No.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm at the matter that you asked me to address specifically, so I'm going to take a little bit of time to make sure that I answer all your questions. Normally, committee problems are left for the committees themselves to sort out. However, there are exceptions. The words of Mr. Speaker Fraser on March 22, 1990, at page 9756 of the debates are very instructive. This is what he said. The Speaker has often informed the House that matters and procedural issues that arise in committee ought to be settled in committee, unless the committee reports them first to the House. I have, however, said to the House that this practice was not an absolute one, and that in very serious and special circumstances, the Speaker may have to pronounce on a committee matter without the committee having reported to the House. This principle was acknowledged more recently by Speaker Milliken in his May 10, 2007 ruling at page 9288 of the debates, where he said, and it quotes, "Nevertheless, circumstances do exist in which the importance of a question may require intervention by the chair." Such circumstances arose in a case where Mr. Speaker Fraser found at page 14629 of the debates for December 4, 1992, a prima facie case of privilege concerning the intimidation of a witness following her committee appearance by the CBC. I would also like to refer the chair to Mr. Speaker Milliken's ruling on November 29, 2010, at page 6560 of the debates. In that case, as some members may personally recall, an individual on the staff of a Finance Committee member had divulged to lobbyists information about recommendations. Despite the employer member's sincere and unequivocal apology about the staff's actions, a prima facie case of privilege was found by the Speaker, who said, "This matter is thus not merely of direct personal concern to the member from whose office the leak came, or even of concern to the Finance Committee which reported the leak. As I see it, this is a situation that is of importance to the whole House and all honourable members. It is an institutional dimension that cannot be ignored given the circumstances. The chair must therefore determine whether it appears that the ability of members to carry out their parliamentary duties have been impeded. Having considered carefully the arguments presented, I have reached the conclusion that in this instance, members of the Standing Committee on Finance, individually and collectively, appear to have been impeded in their work. Accordingly, I have no alternative but to find a prima facie breach of privilege has occurred." Now, to borrow Mr. Speaker Fraser's words about very serious and special circumstances, the situation involving the Justice Committee and the Liberal cover-up, Mr. Speaker, I would submit is one of those cases. And to borrow Mr. Speaker Milliken's view about an institutional concern, I would argue that this present situation is a fundamental and an institutional one. Indeed, the point reminds me of the important ruling by Mr. Speaker Fraser on October 10, 1989, at page 4457 of the debates, respecting presumptuous government advertising. This concern is doubly so in light of the letter published last evening on behalf of the Liberal members of the Justice Committee. Key words often quoted from that ruling should be reiterated. Here they are. We are a parliamentary democracy, not a so-called executive democracy, nor a so-called administrative democracy. Of presuming a committee decision, and just let me roll back on this and why it's important. The fundamental issue of in-camera is that only decisions that are deemed in yes, meaning that only motions that are voted in favor of, are then released to the public. When that Liberal staff member went out and distributed this motion to members of the press individually, they made the presumption that this motion would pass in committee, and that's what I'm referring to here. On this aspect of presuming committee decision, allow me to draw the chair's attention to the ruling by Mr. Speaker Zwadzetski of the Legislative Assembly of Alberta at page 292 of the journals for December 2, 2013, concerning a government brochure which presumed, among other things, a decision to be taken by a legislative committee. In his ruling, the Alberta Speaker said, and I quote, and this is the last quote for the matter, Mr. Speaker, "It is clear to your chair that the advertising in the brochure I referenced earlier did presume that a decision had been made by the Member Services Committee. That decision had not been made, in fact. That decision had not been made until the following Friday. And let me make sure I said that correctly. I am of the opinion that the advertising in the brochure presumed a decision that had not yet been made by the Member Services Committee. The continued absence of adherence to some of the proprieties of this institution causes your chair a great deal of grief and anguish. I would hope that the dignity and authority of this Assembly and of its delegated committees would be given greater respect from this day forward. Accordingly, your chair finds that the government advertising undertaken by the government on page 6 of the aforementioned brochure, the Building Alberta Plan, does constitute prima facie case of privilege. In conclusion, I would respectfully submit that the Liberals' effort at the Justice Committee this morning to turn the channel away from the SNC-Lavalin scandal, which has consumed this government, constitutes a breach of privileges of this House. Should you find a prima facie case of privilege, I am prepared to move the appropriate motion. Thank you.
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary of the House, the Government House. But before I go to the Honourable Member for Wellington Halton Hills, I think is rising on a point related to the vote that happened a few minutes ago.
I'm rising on a point of order as it relates to the upcoming budget speech. The Minister of Finance made it clear to everybody in the lockup that the budget was embargoed till 4 p.m. and it's been long-standing parliamentary convention in this place that the budget is not to be made public before the Minister of Finance makes it public in this House and presents it in this House. Right. And it's also been long-standing convention that the budget is not to be released before North American equity markets close at 4 p.m. Right. Eastern Standard Time. And what happened is that well before 4 p.m., the Minister of Finance table dropped the budget and then proceeded to go into the public sphere, the public realm, and start commenting about his very own budget, while everybody else was still embargoed and prevented from talking about it till 4 p.m. So, Mr. Speaker, I rise on this point of order and ask you to contemplate this matter and ask you to rule on this at some future date about whether or not parliamentary convention was followed and about whether or not breaches of privilege were executed on.
Thank the Honourable Member for Wellington Halton Hills, and of course I'll come back to the House on that matter. As I want to make it clear that I will also come back to the House on the question of privilege matter raised by the Honourable Member for Milton. The Honourable Member for Chilliwack Hope, actually, the Honourable Member for Essex was up first on a point of order.
Mr. Speaker, I rise on the question of privilege that was brought up by the MP from Milton. I was there at committee today for the incident that has been raised by my colleague in the House, and I am also very concerned about the violation and the intentional breach that was accurately described here as what happened today in committee. I have heard what my colleague has just stated and would like the opportunity to come back tomorrow to speak to the question.
Well done.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Allow me to.
Excuse me a moment. I've not yet recognized the member. I will do so in a moment. Honourable Parliamentary Secretary of the Government House Leader is rising on a point of order.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, allow me to briefly address both points that have been raised by the official opposition and the member from the New Democratic Party. The Minister of Finance duly tabled the Budget 2019 documents in the House. That is not contrary to the rules. The opposition has been saying in the media that they will do everything to delay the presentation of the budget, as evidenced by the two motions debated yesterday during routine proceedings, and further evidence of the 257 opposed votes standing on the order paper. On this side of the House, we want to deliver a strong budget. That is our duty as government.
The Honourable, thank you, Parliamentary Secretary is getting into debate. I'd ask you to stick to the point of order.
And then on the second point, Mr. Speaker, thank you for the opportunity to respond to the intervention of the member from Milton. The rules are very clear around in-camera meetings. House of
Keep going, Kev. Keep going.
Mr. Speaker, the rules are very clear around in-camera meetings. House of Commons Procedures and Practice 2017 on pages 1089 and 1090 state the following. Divulging any part of the proceedings of an in-camera meeting has been ruled by the Speaker to constitute a prima facie matter of privilege. The key word here is proceedings. Making public a motion that one intends to move at a meeting is well within the rules. there is a high level of hypocrisy coming from the Conservatives on this very issue. On February the 28th, the member from St. Albert, Edmonton, released a letter publicly on Twitter.
It's getting into debate now. The Honourable Member for Chilliwack Hope is rising. Whenever I remind members that I'm subject to a House order requiring us to move on to something else. I'm a member for Chilliwack Hope.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wanted to go back to the vote that was held at the start of 3:55 with the 30-minute bell.
First of all, you can cut the $2.3 billion that the federal government is giving to fight climate change in Africa. I think it's not the role of the government to fight climate change in Africa. You can cut the corporate welfare, $5 billion over there every year that the government is giving to big businesses. You can save a lot of money. You can privatize also Post Canada, Canada Post. You can save a lot of money doing the right reform and lowering taxes to every Canadian, a flat tax on business on 10%. You are able to do that if you manage well the budget, but they're not doing that. They're spending money and trying to be reelected, but it is irresponsible because at the end, it won't be us who will pay for that. It's my daughters and your children, so it is irresponsible. And when we'll have a recession in this country, and maybe we'll have one, I don't know when, but that's part of the economy, we won't have any fiscal room for that. So it's completely irresponsible. But also at the same time, they're saying that they want to help the families and the poor in this country. And they are giving $3.9 billion to the dairy, poultry, and eggs producer to keep that cartel alive. That's a shame. That cartel charge $800 a year to each family in this country. They are paying twice the price for milk, dairy, and eggs for the last 45 years, and now they want to give compensation with $3.9 billion that we're going to pay for that cartel. With $3.9 billion, they can abolish that cartel. That's the cost to abolish that cartel. So they're not working for the middle class.
Morneau was out there today saying, well, we actually, if you look at debt to GDP ratio, it's projected to go down. It's among the lowest in the G7. And so he says that's a sign that we have actually a good fiscal balance sheet. What's your response to that? Is he looking at the wrong metric, or what's your response to that?
No. First of all, he must do what he said that he would do. They said in a campaign that they will balance the budget this year. So we still have a deficit of $15 billion right now, and next year $19 billion. So the real metrics, it's the deficit. We had more deficit, and we know that the interest rate will go high. The Bank of Canada, they are looking at the economy, and they said maybe we'll be in a recession in a couple of months, of years from now. We won't have any fiscal room, and that's irresponsible. So what they're doing, they're using the money, the taxes. We know that the deficit of today are the taxes of tomorrow, and tomorrow people will have to pay for re-electing the Liberals. That's what they're doing. They want to buy votes, and that's not the way to do politics with people's money and buying votes. That's irresponsible. Like I said also, $3.9 billion to keep a cartel for dairy and milk and poultry. When Canadians are paying twice the price for that, they can save $800 a year. But no, they want that cartel to stay alive for another 45 years. What's that? The cost to abolish that cartel, it's about $4 billion. So you can abolish it right now, and Canadians will save $800 every year. So they're saying that they're working for the middle class, and they're not. They're not working for my daughters. They're not working for your children. They will have to pay for this deficit, and they will have to pay for the re-election of the liberal government. But that's why we'll have a very interesting campaign, and I will be there to fight for them.
De la politique, finalement, le ministre des Finances peut se lever et livrer son discours. Vous pensez quoi des manœuvres des conservateurs qui ont retardé l'exercice?
C'est ridicule. Il y a d'autres moyens. La démocratie existe dans ce pays-là, et puis les conservateurs essaient d'utiliser des moyens pour empêcher le ministre de déposer son budget. C'est un moment important dans notre vie démocratique, ce budget-là. Et moi, je pense qu'ils en ont fait assez à la période des questions, poser des questions. Moi aussi, je souhaiterais que l'ancienne sollicitrice générale puisse parler, mais il y a d'autres places pour faire ce débat-là. Je trouve que c'est une procédure ridicule qu'ils ont fait.
Do you believe that the just transition measures to move coal workers away and retrain them and broadly...
It's not the role of the federal government. It's a jurisdiction. It's the role of the provincial government. So, that budget, it's always also about interfering in provincial jurisdiction. They want to do that with their Medicare program. Healthcare is a provincial jurisdiction. And also, helping workers, it is mostly a provincial jurisdiction. So the best way to help everybody is to lower taxes to every single worker in this country, and they're not doing that.
They're looking to drag the country's economy off of a reliance on fossil fuel extraction. Do you support that idea in general?
No, I don't. The government cannot dictate what would be the economy. The government cannot dictate what would be the economy in the future. The free market will decide. They cannot. I cannot choose winner. They're choosing winner and loser right now, and that's not good. The government cannot do that.
It's the government's job, though, to work to reduce emissions as they've committed to in Paris?
But as you know, I'm against that. I'm against the Paris Accord. I'm the only politician here against that. I think it must be a provincial matters, and provincial want to deal for climate change. They can do it. Environment is a shared jurisdiction between the federal government and provinces, and on that point, I'll let the province do what they want to do on climate change.
So what would be a federal government's top priorities then?
Top priority must be to work to create the best economic environment, and they're not doing that. Our tax system is not competitive anymore. We don't have a lot of investment in it right now, and we know that the investment is the future of the economic growth. We need more investment. So that's not a budget for the future. Thank you.
Budget, if we break down the life of a Canadian, people who have young families who have a child will continue to spend as much as $25,000 a year for childcare or daycare because there is no supports for folks who need that support. The small amount that there's been given doesn't do anything for $25,000 a year for childcare. As someone gets older and wants to buy a home, this government doesn't have anything in this budget to build new affordable housing, nothing in this budget to address cooperative housing or non-market housing. Instead, they're offering people to use their RRSPs to buy their home. How many millennials are able to have enough in their RRSP to buy a home? It shows how disconnected Mr. Trudeau is with respect to what Canadians are going through. As someone gets older and needs to maybe retrain, there is nothing in this budget that addresses the reality that many millennials don't have secure employment. They work precarious employment. They work contract employment. And this budget that was touted as a budget to deal with retraining doesn't actually allow for millennials who are dealing with precarious work to actually access that funding. As someone gets older and wants to access medication throughout their life, this budget does nothing to implement true universal healthcare coverage, medication coverage for all Canadians. Instead, it seems that this government has caved into the pharmaceutical industry and has abandoned that commitment, has abandoned, in fact, making changes that would have reduced the cost of medication. And finally, when someone tries to retire, this government has done nothing to close the current laws that have basically allowed companies to steal pensions. The situation with Sears, where $700 million of pensions that were stolen has not been rectified in this budget. It could have been done. Again, throughout the life of the Canadian.
Order. I want to remind members of Standing Order 82-2, which provides an order of the day for the consideration of a Ways and Means motion or motions shall be designated at the request of a minister rising in his or her place in the House. When such an order is designated for a budget presentation, the minister shall specify the date and time thereof, and the order shall be deemed to be an order of the House to sit beyond the ordinary hour of daily adjournment if required. At the specified time, the Speaker shall interrupt any proceedings then before the House, and such proceedings shall be deemed adjourned, and the House shall proceed forthwith to the consideration of the Ways and Means motion for the budget presentation. At 5 p.m. on April 27, 1989, Speaker Fraser was in the process of hearing arguments concerning a question of privilege raised concerning an alleged budget leak. He interrupted the arguments, which he agreed to give a further hearing to at a later time in order to permit the budget presentation. At that time, the Speaker stated, debates, April 27, 1989, at page 1060, the difficulty the Speaker is in this present situation is that while fully understanding the position of the official opposition and the New Democratic Party, and fully understanding the reason for it, the fact of the matter is that we now have a House order which was passed by the House. I can see no way that I can unilaterally change that. He continued after indicating his intention to hear further argument. However, while I do not know what may eventually happen on the privilege issue, I do know what the House has done with the special House order. I must advise honorable members that I am bound by it. Therefore, it is my duty to recognize the Honorable Minister of Finance. Now, the Honorable Member for Skeena-Bulkley Valley is rising on a brief point of order.
Thank you, Speaker. Very briefly, thank you for that ruling. Of course, in the past number of minutes, as the Finance Minister... That wasn't me. I swear.
He's there. He's there.
As I attempted to, I see there's an emergency alert, but unrelated. Thank you, Speaker. As I was attempting to listen to the Finance Minister deliver the budget speech, it was of course impossible for any member, I believe, in the House, even those perhaps adjacent to the Finance Minister, to hear the speech. It's a privilege, it's a long-standing privilege in this place. We are able to hear one another, even amongst the rigorous debate that this House sometimes enjoys. I wonder if there might be a path forward through you, Speaker, to allow the small discussion that was attempted prior to the speech taking place so that we could actually continue on with the House business of today and hear the speech in some way so that members of Parliament and Canadians through us can understand what the government is proposing in their budget. Thank you.
The honourable member for Carleton is responding to the same point of order. Briefly, I hope.
Yes, the point that I was attempting to raise earlier on is that the Finance Minister already presented the budget earlier today at about 5 minutes to 4 o'clock. That was his budget presentation. He was given the opportunity to do so. It just so happens that that presentation occurred before the closing of trading on the financial markets, which is a breach at the very least of good management and possibly something more serious. But the reality is that the Finance Minister has had an opportunity to speak once already. If you're going to let him speak twice, then why is it that the former Attorney General has only had an opportunity to speak once and cannot speak again?
Thank the honourable member for Skeena-Bulkley Valley, honourable member for Carleton, for their comments. Of course, the Finance Minister rose earlier on a point of order. He's now speaking on the Ways and Means motion and is for the budget presentation. Therefore, the Minister of Finance has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank you for allowing me to proceed. It's obviously been a pleasure to start this speech. I hope that you've heard the parts that I've already delivered, but I do want to continue from where I was. And what I was getting at was some things that we want to do in the housing market. And in particular, I was talking about the fact that we want to take action to crack down on the people who break the rules. who evade taxes or use real estate for money laundering, making housing less affordable for the people who need it. And I want to help more middle-class families find an affordable home today. We're offering new, targeted support for first-time homebuyers. This includes increasing the RSP homebuyers plan withdrawal $35,000 and $25,000, just like the reality of home prices today. And it includes a new initiative called First-Time Homebuyer Incentive, which will allow eligible first-time homebuyers to finance a portion of their home purchase with a shared equity mortgage and a mortgage housing mortgage. The incentive will give eligible buyers a new source of funds that they can use to help keep their monthly costs low. For example, that's something for the Ashley and Legal Condo, not something for the Bel-Air, or some other institute for all
Order. I'm going to go very briefly to the Honourable Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Yes, on a point of order, Mr. Speaker. This is the actions of the government today have been unprecedented, have been an assault on democracy. They have shut down the only public investigation into the Prime Minister's SNC-Lavalin corruption scandal, a scandal which touches upon the Finance Minister himself.
Yeah.
The Finance Minister is today presenting a budget after he has been implicated in an unprecedented assault on the independent rule of law. And Conservatives will not sit idly by while Liberals destroy the integrity of our justice system.
Thank the Honourable Leader of the Opposition. The Honourable Minister of Finance. Order.
As you please.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for recognizing me. I'd like to summarize what I've been presenting over the course of the last number of minutes for Canadians, because I know Canadians want to hear what it is that this government is trying to do to ensure that we continue to have the good fortune for all of us that we expect. We come into this budget 2019, having had very positive economic results over the last 3.5 years. We made the decision back in 2015 to invest in Canadians. Those investments in Canadians the addition of the Canada Child Benefit, for example, the introduction of the Canada Workers Benefit, they have had important impacts on where we found ourselves economically. We find ourselves today at the lowest unemployment rates we've seen for 40 years. We have higher workforce participation for women. We have higher workforce participation for disabled people. We have higher workforce participation for Indigenous people. We have higher workforce participation for new immigrants, and we have higher workforce participation for youth. Truly, Mr. Speaker, we are
to be paid for by higher taxes after the election. Trudeau cache sa corruption reliée à SNC-Lavalin à sous de 41 milliards de dollars de nouvelles dépenses financées par des hausses d'impôts s'il est réélu. C'est le camouflage la plus cher de l'histoire des camouflages. Ce sont des déficits budgétaires pour cacher le scandale avant l'élection et des hausses d'impôts pour les payer après les élections. The SNC-Lavalin corruption scandal has entirely consumed Justin Trudeau's government for the past 6 weeks. And just now, the Finance Minister presented a budget as though it were business as usual. It is not business as usual. And we could not stand by while the Liberals pretended otherwise. Justin Trudeau tried to stop the criminal prosecution of a Liberal-friendly company by bullying his Attorney General, Jody Wilson-Raybould, into letting them off the hook. And when she wouldn't do it, he fired her. Since then, he has silenced her. He won't waive the privileges and confidences that legally prevent her from telling Canadians what she knows. And earlier today, he shut down the only public investigation into this corruption scandal. They say the cover-up is worse than the crime, but Justin Trudeau must have come to the opposite conclusion. No cover-up can be worse than what he did. In the aftermath of this corruption scandal, Mr. Trudeau has lost 2 of his top cabinet ministers to resignation. His best friend and senior advisor had to resign under a cloud of scandal, and the top civil servant, the clerk of the Privy Council, had to do the same thing. Today's budget is part of the continuing cover-up. This budget is not a serious fiscal plan for the country. It is a $41 billion corruption cover-up that Canadians will pay for if he's re-elected. His desperate attempts at a cover-up are themselves part of this corruption. His justice investigation shutdown was an abuse of power, an affront to democracy, and an attack on Parliament. Canadians expect accountability in Parliament. And for Justin Trudeau to shut down a committee investigating his corrupt practices and only hours later turn around and present a budget to Canadians as though everything was normal was something we could not sit in the House and stomach.
Hear, hear.
This
Hear.
budget has no legitimacy,
Hear, hear.
and we could not legitimize it by remaining in the chamber. In the days ahead, we will continue to highlight this government's cover-up agenda. As you just witnessed, we will use every tool at our disposal to hold Justin Trudeau to account. Nothing is off the table, and we are prepared for anything. Canadians deserve answers, and Conservatives are determined to get them. Justin Trudeau a tenté d'arrêter la poursuite criminelle d'une firme émiée des libéraux en intimidant sa procureure générale, Jody Wilson-Raybould, pour qu'elle intervienne. Quand elle a refusé de la faire, il l'a renvoyée. Depuis, il l'empêche de parler. Il refuse de lever le secret et la confidentialité qui l'empêche légalement de dire ce qu'elle sait aux Canadiens et aux Canadiennes. Et plus tôt aujourd'hui, elle a mis fin à la seule enquête publique pour ce scandale de corruption. On dit que le secret est pire que le crime, mais Justin Trudeau pense autrement. Aucun secret ne peut être pire que ce qu'il a fait. À cause de ce scandale de corruption, M. Trudeau a perdu 2 de ses meilleurs ministres qui ont démissionné. Il a perdu son meilleur ami et principal conseiller politique. Il a perdu son plus haut fonctionnaire. Et elle a perdu l'autorité morale de gouverner. Le budget d'aujourd'hui fait partie de cette dissimulation. Ce budget n'est pas un plan économique sérieux pour le pays. Il a été préparé sous un nuage de scandales. C'est un camouflage de 41 milliards de dollars que les Canadiens paieront s'il est réélu. Et il n'est rien de plus qu'une tentative de limiter les dégâts avec un seul objectif: détourner l'attention des Canadiens et des Canadiennes de sa corruption. Mais les Canadiens et les Canadiennes ne se laisseront pas faire. Ces tentatives désespérées font elles-mêmes partie de sa corruption. L'arrêt de l'enquête du Comité de la justice est un abus du pouvoir, un outrage à la démocratie et une attaque envers le Parlement. Les Canadiens et les Canadiennes s'attendent à ce que le Parlement rende des comptes. Et le fait que Justin Trudeau stoppait un comité qui enquête sur ces pratiques corrompues pour présenter quelques heures plus tard un budget comme si tout était normal est une chose que nous ne pouvions pas laisser passer à la Chambre. Ce budget n'a aucune légitimité et nous ne pouvions pas lui en accorder en restant présents à la Chambre. Au cours des prochains jours, nous allons continuer à protéger les tentatives de dissimulation du gouvernement. Comme vous venez de le voir, nous allons utiliser tous les outils à notre disposition pour demander des comptes à Justin Trudeau. Rien n'est exclu. Nous sommes prêts à tout. Les Canadiens et les Canadiennes méritent des réponses et les conservateurs sont déterminés à les obtenir. Merci. Thank you very much.
On a day that the budget is tabled, to be there to represent Canadians when the budget's being tabled, take it in and respond with your own response to the budget speech. So what are you doing focusing on a procedural matter?
Shutting down a public investigation into a corruption affair is not just a procedural matter. It is an attack on the rule of law and our parliamentary democracy. We will not sit idly by and allow that to happen.
Rien entendre de M. Morneau et qui risque de voir ça comme des enfantillages de l'opposition. Vous leur dites quoi?
C'est le gouvernement qui a décidé de tromper les traditions de notre Parlement, qui a ingéré et arrêté une enquête publique sur la question de la corruption, de l'ingérence politique d'une poursuite criminelle. Ça, c'est le choix de M. Trudeau. Il a choisi de faire cet abus. Le ministre des Finances a déjà présenté ce budget avant les votes aujourd'hui et les conservateurs ne peuvent pas siéger pendant cette camouflage.
Sur le contenu du budget, M. Scheer.
Do you know what I'm hearing from Canadians? Canadians are telling me that they want to hear Jody Wilson-Raybould speak. They want this cover-up to end. They want her to be able to come back and fill in the gaps and complete her testimony. Justin Trudeau is so afraid of what she might say that he was willing to lose 2 cabinet ministers, his principal advisor, the clerk of the Privy Council, and now destroy his budget day message, all in a desperate attempt to cover up his corruption scandal. That's what I'm hearing from Canadians from coast to coast.
Jody Wilson, have you asked Jody Wilson-Raybould how she feels about your party?
Est-ce que, sur le contenu du budget, est-ce que vous avez des réflexions, par exemple, le fait qu'on a toujours un déficit ou encore certaines des mesures promises en prévision des élections? Est-ce que vous avez des réflexions là-dessus?
Nous sommes toujours contre les grands déficits hors de contrôle. Nous sommes toujours contre les nouveaux taxes. Mais la chose la plus importante aujourd'hui pour les Canadiens et Canadiennes, c'est qu'ils savent que ce budget est aucune chose lors d'un essai de cacher la vérité de ce scandale.
Have you spoken to Jody Wilson-Raybould about how she feels about your party taking up her fight?
Jody Wilson-Raybould herself has asked to come back to the Justice Committee. Ms. Wilson-Raybould herself has sent a letter to her constituents indicating that there are important details that need to come to light in order to preserve the integrity of our rule of law and our justice system. All we are asking, we just want to let her speak for herself. It's Gerald Butts and Michael Wernick who have put words in her mouth. It's Justin Trudeau's team that is trying to tell Canadians that she's just experiencing things differently. We don't want to hear Justin Trudeau speaking for Jody Wilson-Raybould. We want to hear from her herself and want to let her speak.
Today, and on the budget today, what's your message to Canadians?
My message to Canadians is that this is Justin Trudeau's attempt to cover up the SNC-Lavalin affair by spending $41 billion in brand new spending that Canadians will have to pay for through higher taxes if he's re-elected.
Mr. Chair, on the budget, what specific tactics will you use out of your parliamentary toolbox in the coming days? Which specific tactics will you use to keep the spotlight on this affair?
As you've witnessed in the past, when this government does not respect the fundamental principles of how our parliament is supposed to work, the opposition uses all the tools that are available to us. You'll understand if I didn't share that with you right now today, but we will use every measure available to us to ensure that Canadians know the seriousness of this situation. We are talking about the abuse of power. Justin Trudeau abusing the power of his office to interfere in our justice system, violating the principles of the independent judicial system and the supremacy of the rule of law. That is extremely dangerous. We do not want to become the kind of country where powerful politicians can use the justice system to reward their friends and punish their enemies. For generations, people have come to Canada fleeing countries where that is all too common. Conservatives will fight to protect Canada's democracy and our rule of law.
Trying to drive things to a halt in there until they bow to your demand? And if so, do you think there should be an election right now if it's your commitment to try and make sure Parliament doesn't work because of their actions?
It's very clear that Justin Trudeau has decided that the political pain associated with the cover-up is better than the pain of the truth coming out. He is obviously so desperate to hide something. Something happened between the day that Ms. Wilson-Raybould lost her job as Attorney General until the day that she resigned from Cabinet. And he is so desperate to keep that hidden. Canadians now see the lengths that he will go to keep those facts hidden. And I know that Canadians are very upset about that.
On the budget, there's no plan to balance. I'm wondering what your party would do differently, how you would plan to get to a balanced budget, and by when.
Remember, this is the year that the budget was supposed to balance itself. And what Canadians have learned is that budgets don't balance themselves. They also know that the $41 billion of new spending is all just an attempt at covering up this SNC-Lavalin corruption scandal, and that they will have to pay for it if Justin Trudeau is re-elected. Conservatives aren't going to let that happen. Conservatives aren't going to let him raise taxes. Conservatives will fight to bring fiscal responsibility back to this country. Thank you very much.
And to ensure that money earmarked for communities is invested as intended, we will be giving a one-time boost to municipalities through a municipal infrastructure top-up, doubling this year's federal commitment through the gas tax fund. Transferring funds to communities gets projects built. Projects like the Minto Park Concession Building in Dawson City, the Emerald Park Soccer Facility in Edenwold, Saskatchewan, and the Armand Lavoie Amphitheatre in Tracadie, New Brunswick. Monsieur le Président, les communautés de notre pays sont l'une de nos priorités. Nous leur avons promis cet appui et nous tenons parole. Nous savons aussi que dans le monde connecté d'aujourd'hui, il est plus important que jamais pour les Canadiens d'avoir un accès rapide et fiable à l'Internet. Des petites entreprises à la recherche de clients aux quatre coins du monde, aux aînés qui souhaitent maintenir le contact avec leur famille et leurs amis, en passant par les étudiants des collèges qui veulent passer à l'été à la maison tout en suivant des cours en ligne ou postuler pour un emploi. Pour ces personnes, l'Internet à haute vitesse est une nécessité et non un luxe. Et c'est pourquoi, dans le budget d'aujourd'hui, nous annonçons un nouveau plan national pour atteindre cet objectif. By 2030, every Canadian home and small business will have access to high-speed Internet no matter where they are located. Mr. Speaker, for those people who say 2030 is a long time away, I want to make sure they know that work is already underway. Supported by the accelerated investment incentive introduced last fall, service providers are already working to bring high-speed internet to more Canadian homes in rural and remote locations. Building a better Canada also means helping people to be part of the clean economy, with energy bills that they can afford and cleaner ways to get around. That's why with this budget, we're taking steps to make zero-emission vehicles more affordable for more Canadians, with a new federal purchase incentive of up to $5,000 for electric battery or hydrogen fuel cell vehicles for Canadians who want to make the switch and pay less at the pump. We'll also provide immediate expensing to a full range of zero-emission vehicles so that businesses that want to switch over their fleet can recoup their investments sooner. To help make monthly electricity bills more affordable, we will enter into a partnership with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities to offer funds to make homes and businesses more energy efficient. This will help support retrofits like new hot water systems or rooftop solar panels that can help lower monthly bills. At the same time, we know that building a better Canada must, by definition, include advancing reconciliation with Indigenous peoples.
Absolutely.
That's why Budget 2019 includes important new measures to help advance self-determination and improve the quality of life for First Nations, Inuit, and Métis Nation people. It includes new investments to better uphold Jordan's Principle so that First Nations children can get the help that they need, when they need it, where they need it. It includes new support for Indigenous languages, for Indigenous entrepreneurs and businesses, for mental health and home care, and for emergency response. All critical parts of healthy and successful Indigenous communities. And most critically, it includes continued investments to make sure that these communities have clean, safe water. There are today children living on reserve in Canada who cannot safely drink or bathe in or even play in the water that comes out of their taps. It's not okay. So we'll continue to work hard and make the investments that are needed to finally make this right. So far, we have lifted more than 80 long-term water advisories, and we're on track to eliminate all of the advisories over the next 2 years. Monsieur le Président, j'ai ici fait part de certains détails sur la signification du budget de 2019 pour la classe moyenne et les personnes qui travaillent fort pour en faire partie, pour les travailleurs canadiens, pour les jeunes et aînés canadiens et pour les peuples autochtones. Toutefois, je veux indiquer très clairement qu'il s'agit d'un budget pour les gens et les communautés de l'ensemble du pays. Je parle ici des personnes qui se rassemblent pour attendre, pour apprendre, travailler ou prier. Peu importe où ils se rassemblent, les Canadiens devraient toujours se sentir en sécurité. C'est pourquoi, dans ce budget, nous doublons nos investissements en vue de protéger nos communautés contre les crimes motivés par l'intolérance et la haine. Afin de mieux combattre le racisme au Canada, nous adoptons une nouvelle stratégie de lutte contre le racisme. Les deux mesures sont vraiment importantes en ce moment dans notre pays, Monsieur le Président. Bravo. En reconnaissance de la destinée internationale des personnes d'ascendance africaine des Nations Unies, nous collaborerons avec les leaders communautaires en vue de célébrer et de mieux faire connaître les communautés de Canadiens noirs. Afin de donner à plus de personnes ici au Canada et à l'étranger la chance de voir, d'entendre et d'apprécier nos artistes talentueux, nous faisons des investissements qui appuieront nos musiciens et la présence de festivals et de séries de spectacles artistiques dans plus de communautés de toutes les régions du pays. Canada is also a country where we take care of each other in our times of need, including times of serious and life-threatening mental distress. To support people who need immediate crisis support, we'll work with experienced and dedicated partners to support across Canada suicide prevention service. It'll be available in English and in French by phone, text, or chat 24/7. So that no one who needs help goes without. For people in the prairie provinces and parts of Western Canada who are critically ill or injured and need emergency medical help, we're investing $65 million in new emergency ambulance helicopters for the region's Shock Trauma Air Rescue Service, or STARS. And because we know that our prairie provinces are especially vulnerable to the extreme weather events that go hand in hand with climate change, and because we value our hard-working farmers and ranchers who help to feed us and keep our economy strong, we'll work with our Western partners on a plan to protect water and soil in the prairies. Afin de nous assurer que les agriculteurs canadiens des secteurs des produits laitiers, de la volaille et des œufs pourront continuer à fournir aux Canadiens des produits de haute qualité dans un monde où le commerce est plus libre, nous mettrons à la disposition des agriculteurs soumis à la gestion de l'offre un programme de protection de revenus ainsi qu'une mesure visant à protéger les investissements que ces agriculteurs ont déjà faits dans le contingent de production. Et à l'Est, afin de maintenir des services de traversier sécuritaires et fiables auxquels se fient les gens de l'Atlantique, nous élargirons le soutien des services existants et chercherons à acheter 3 nouveaux traversiers modernes. Bravo. Mr. Speaker, even for those who don't speak French, that's a good measure. In communities all across the country, Mr. Speaker, we know that hundreds of thousands of Canadians are living with cancer. Every single day, about 565 people receive a cancer diagnosis, and around 220 people die from cancer. It's something that touches every community and most of our families. To help give more cancer patients and their families help and hope, we'll provide the Terry Fox Research Institute with up to $150 million to establish a national Another illness that touches the lives of millions of Canadians is dementia. With this budget, we're investing $50 million to support Canada's first national dementia strategy. This is going to give people living with dementia a better quality of life and to ensure that their caregivers, who are primarily women, get the help and support that they need as well. Afin de nous assurer que notre système d'immigration est équitable et efficace et qu'il appuie la réputation du Canada en tant que pays accueillant où règne la primauté de droit, nous investirons dans une stratégie exhaustive en matière de protection frontalière en vue de mieux détecter et intercepter les personnes qui entrent irrégulièrement au Canada et qui tentent d'exploiter notre système d'octroi de l'asile.
Bravo.
Bravo. We will also renew our Middle East strategy for another 2 years, supporting humanitarian, development, stabilization, security, intelligence, and diplomatic activities across the region, in addition to our military contribution.
Yeah, that's very good.
And to ensure greater fairness in our tax system, we'll take action to limit the benefit of the stock option deduction for executives of large, long-established corporations, while ensuring that everyday employees aren't affected and that startups and emerging Canadian businesses can continue to grow, attract talent, and create more good jobs.
Bravo.
Mr. Speaker, we live in a world that's changing and changing quickly. Canadians know that we can't stop the trends that are already transforming the world around us. Things like new technologies and more automation. All that they ask for is a chance to find their way in this new world with help from the government so they can have their best shot at building a good future for themselves, for their children, and their grandchildren. C'est ce que nous faisons dans ce budget. Nous investissons dans la classe moyenne et dans son avenir, afin que les jeunes aient déjà l'expérience dont ils ont besoin pour obtenir un bon emploi au moment où ils terminent leur étude. Avec une prête d'études qu'ils ont les moyens de rembourser et une chance réelle de devenir propriétaires d'un logement. Afin que les aînés puissent envisager avec optimisme le temps qu'ils passeront avec leur famille et leurs amis lorsqu'ils seront à leur retraite, plutôt que de s'inquiéter à propos de leur facteur mensuel. So that every Canadian can feel good about what the future holds and be confident about their place in a changing world. And so that Canadian kids, like the ones I spent time with last week in Toronto, can grow up in a country where nothing holds them back. That's what's at stake. And that's what we can accomplish together when we invest in the middle class. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? Order. Order. Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Carleton.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is covering up his corruption. Under $41 billion in brand new spending that he'll pay for in higher taxes after the election if he's re-elected. In this sense, it is the most expensive cover-up in the history of cover-ups. It's the Liberal two-step. Big deficit spending to distract from corruption before the election, big tax hikes to pay for it after the election. And we are full circle. Last budget, the Finance Minister introduced quietly, changes to the criminal code allowing large corporations accused of fraud, bribery, and other corruption to get off trial by signing a special deal. We didn't know why he was doing that, but we soon found out when we learned that the Finance Minister and the Prime Minister pressured the former Attorney General to offer a special deal to end the prosecution of SNC-Lavalin for over $100 million of bribery and fraud. Now, the Finance Minister has so far been running scared, unwilling to answer questions about the pressure he applied on the former Attorney General. She testified to that pressure. She said that his Chief of Staff did likewise to her personnel. So my question is this: if the Finance Minister has nothing to hide, will he, yes or no, appear before a parliamentary committee to answer questions about the pressure and the interference he carried out on the former Attorney General with regards to the SNC corruption scandal?
Finance. Mr. Speaker, I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank the honourable member for talking about our budget for a very brief part of his commentary. I do think that I want to address those issues first and foremost, because what he was saying was, in fact, in one way, absolutely true. We have decided to make investments on behalf of middle-class Canadians so that we can improve their situation in the long term. I think Canadians, as they look at Budget 2019, will see that as particularly good news, because what they'll see is that what this government has done since the very beginning is we've made investments in them and their future. What they also see is those investments demonstrably work, because what's happened over the last 3.5 years is investments in Canadians, investments in their families, and more jobs and more opportunities for their children. So we're in a much better situation than we've been in for the entirety of the honourable member for Carleton's life, in terms of much, much lower unemployment than he has ever seen in his life. So as I go out to people in my constituency, as the member for Carleton goes out to members and people in his constituency, what he'll find is more and more often, if he does that during the day, that they will actually be at work, because they're working in good jobs, full-time jobs that have been created over the last 3.5 years. That is the kind of efforts that we have worked on behalf of Canadians. We're going to continue doing that each and every day. Now, where the member from Carleton was absolutely incorrect was when he talked about the impacts of what we've done, because what he would recognize, if he looked carefully at the numbers, is we have the very best balance sheet among G7 countries, and we've made it better every single year. We've reduced our amount of debt every single year as a proportion of our economy. That is important for us to notice, and it's important for all Canadians to see. Investing in Canadians in a fiscally responsible way is a way for the future of this country.
L'honorable député de Sherbrooke.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Et aujourd'hui, c'était le budget de la dernière chance pour le gouvernement libéral. Mais comme les autres budgets auparavant dans les dernières années, c'est une occasion manquée. Et comme il est un gouvernement empêtré dans un scandale d'ingérence politique dans le système de justice, il savait que c'était probablement sa dernière chance d'effectuer des changements significatifs et durables. Mais encore une fois, c'est une occasion ratée. Mais non, parce qu'au lieu, il alimente le cynisme politique en répétant des promesses électorales qu'il aurait pu remplir depuis 2015. Et on est maintenant en 2019, Monsieur le Président. L'assurance médicaments qui est promis par les libéraux depuis 20 ans déjà devrait encore attendre du gouvernement libéral. Et ils vont aller en campagne électorale pour faire croire que cette fois-ci, c'est la bonne et qu'on peut leur faire confiance, Monsieur le Président. Les producteurs sous gestion de l'offre devront aussi attendre pour voir la couleur de leur argent, alors que ça fait longtemps qu'on connaît les impacts des accords de l'AECG et le PTP qui devront attendre après la prochaine élection. Et rien pour l'ALENA 2.0. L'équité fiscale devra aussi attendre, Monsieur le Président, alors qu'on admet qu'on a seulement atteint une fraction des 25 milliards qu'on était supposé récupérer. Les déductions pour option d'achat d'actions sont noir sur blanc décrites comme hautement régressives, mais le ministre des Finances dit que ça va attendre à plus tard pour faire quelque chose, alors qu'1,3 milliard sont allés dans les poches de 2000 personnes qui gagnent plus d'1 1 million de dollars là-dedans en 2017. Les géants du Web ont encore un passe-droit qui va continuer sous le gouvernement libéral jusqu'à la prochaine élection. Mais le pire dans tout ça, c'est le manque d'ambition en matière d'environnement, Monsieur le Président, alors que des jeunes marchaient dans les rues en fin de semaine et vendredi dernier pour avoir de l'action sur les changements climatiques. On a un maigre 87 millions de dollars sur 40 milliards de nouvelles dépenses du gouvernement. 87 millions vont en environnement et changement climatique. Donc, ma question est donc simple, Monsieur le Président. Considérant le manque de leadership flagrant sur cette question si cruciale, quand est-ce que le ministre et son gouvernement vont céder leur place à des vrais leaders en matière de changement climatique pour enfin faire le virage nécessaire? Bravo!
L'honorable ministre des Finances.
Monsieur le Président, je voudrais commencer par expliquer que nous avons décidé de continuer avec notre approche de faire des investissements dans la classe moyenne, exactement dans les mesures où le député a considéré. Par exemple, on a commencé une approche très importante pour notre système de médicaments national. C'est très important. On a eu un rapport, on a commencé avec les mesures qui vont être la fondation de notre système pour l'avenir. C'est très important d'être responsable, de trouver une façon d'assurer les Canadiens qu'on va avoir un système qui fonctionne pour le long terme. Ça, c'est notre approche. C'est une approche très importante. Au niveau de gestion d'offres, nous avons expliqué clairement que nous avons trouvé une approche pour 2,4 milliards de dollars pour le secteur gestion d'offres et c'est la même approche que le gouvernement précédent et ça c'est très important. On va continuer nos discussions pour assurer qu'on a une approche qui garde la situation pour les gens dans les secteurs. Finalement, on a parlé aussi au sujet des changements climatiques. C'est le parti ici qui a décidé d'avoir une prise sur pollution. Ça, c'est la chose la plus importante pour améliorer notre situation pour l'avenir. Nous continuons avec cette approche parce que nous savons que ça va être très important pour l'avenir de nous et nos enfants et petits-enfants.
Député de Bécancour, Nicolas Sorel.
Oui. Merci, M. le Président. Je voudrais d'abord dire que le Bloc québécois se dissocie complètement des actions commises pendant le budget par le Parti conservateur. Nous avons un profond respect pour la tradition dans cette Chambre. Il y a des moments solennels qu'il faut respecter et il y a des moments aussi pour les débats. Et je pense que la démocratie, c'est d'abord les débats et non pas de faire du bruit. Je voudrais vous demander, Monsieur le ministre, vous avez énoncé votre budget, mais j'ai remarqué que le Québec a été comme avant.
Monsieur le Président.
Oui, excusez-moi.
Député de diriger ses commentaires vers la présidence.
Monsieur le Président, comme nouveau député, je ne me rappelais pas, là. Alors, dans le budget que vous avez, que le ministre a énoncé, Monsieur le Président, on ne parle pas des attentes du tout du Québec. Et c'est les trois attentes principales que le gouvernement Legault avait soulevées. C'était la ligne bleue à Montréal, le tramway à Québec et le chantier un contrat pour la dévie dans le chantier maritime, mais rien de cela. De même qu'on avait toujours espérance que les géants du web soient taxés au même titre que les compagnies comme Bell et comme Vidéotron le sont. Alors ça va être une grande déception pour le Québec, Monsieur le ministre.
L'honorable ministre des Finances.
Monsieur le Président, je voudrais commencer par remercier le député pour le commentaire important au niveau de comment nous pouvons être dans cette chambre. C'est très important. Bien sûr, nous continuons de travailler avec le gouvernement du Québec. C'est une chose très importante. Nous avons parlé avec eux plusieurs fois pour assurer que notre approche, les investissements en infrastructure sont faits avec eux pour améliorer la situation au Québec. Et ça, c'est important. Bien sûr, nous avons aussi des autres choses à faire ensemble. comme notre approche au niveau de notre système de médicaments. Mais on va continuer de travailler ensemble avec le gouvernement de Québec pour améliorer la situation des citoyens là, et ça, c'est très important.
The honourable member for Carleton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister is covering up his corruption under $41 billion of brand new spending, which he will pay for with higher taxes if he's reelected. This must be the biggest and most expensive cover-up in the history of cover-ups. It's, the new Liberal two-step. Get yourself out of a big scandal with massive deficits before Canadians vote, and then hit them all with tax hikes after they vote. Now, it's interesting the irony that is in the air today, because it was a year ago that this Minister of Finance stood in this place to introduce a budget in which he failed to mention a tiny little detail that he wanted to sneak into the eventual 600-page omnibus budget bill that he would introduce. And that was an amendment to the Criminal Code. It was discovered in the Finance Committee as members from all parties were leafing through this massive tomb of paper and stumbled upon an amendment to the Criminal Code. The reaction was astonishment. Astonishment by all sides. In fact, the Liberal member for Hull-Elmer said it left a bad taste in his mouth. He said that he had the impression reading the amendment that if he stole just $10, he'd be in trouble, but that if he stole $10 million, he'd be just fine. That was how he interpreted the Finance Minister's amendments to the Criminal Code. But what boggled us all was that who was asking for this? We had traveled around our communities, and we had not stumbled upon a single person who was interested in helping corporate crooks get off without conviction. So why would the Finance Minister slip such a measure into that budget? Well, we found out, didn't we? In February of this year, the Globe and Mail broke a story that the Prime Minister had personally and politically pressured his Attorney General in order to shelve the charges into a Liberal-linked corporation, SNC-Lavalin. Lavalin was known to everyone as the company that gave $100,000 of illegal donations to the Liberal Party, having been caught and having to return that money. Known for prominent links through its massive army of lobbyists, which swarm around the Hill and spend inordinate amounts of time, according to the Public Lobbyist Registry, with people like the Finance Minister and the staff of the Prime Minister. So the Prime Minister said, none of it's true. It's all a lie. Well, he said, as proof that it was all a lie, that, look, my Attorney General is in my cabinet. If she were so upset, why doesn't she leave? And guess what? The next day she did. She resigned from his cabinet. And then eventually, we learned more. After a massive pressure campaign to let her speak, the Prime Minister backed down and lifted, partially, the gag order on her. He allowed her to appear before the Justice Committee and to speak, but not too much. She was only allowed to testify about events that occurred before she was removed as Attorney General. Anything that happened after that period was to remain a secret. She did not have legal authorization as a former minister to say anything. And so when she was asked why she resigned, she indicated she could not say. When she was asked about her meetings with the Prime Minister in January and February, she told us she could not say. She did name 7 senior officials in this Liberal government who she says, and I will pull a selection of quotes here, interfered, made veiled threats, hounded, and pressured her to shelve the charges into SNC-Lavalin. She even went as far as to compare it to the Saturday Night Massacre, a reference to Richard Nixon's Watergate firings. What did the government do then? Well, soon after, there were attacks on her. Senior Liberals, including a former Deputy Liberal Prime Minister, attacked her for her Indigenous roots and for her gender. And then they sent out Michael Wernick to give a partisan speech. This is the clerk of the supposedly nonpartisan Prime Minister's top public service official. He turned the top public service official into a partisan actor. And we've seen the scandal unfold from there. And so far, it has been an incredible spectacle. The Attorney General has resigned. The Treasury Board President has resigned. The top public servant in the Liberal government has resigned. And the Prime Minister's principal secretary and best friend, most important advisor, has resigned. Everybody's resigned, but no one did anything wrong, they assure you. Today, just to make sure, Conservatives put forward a motion at the Justice Committee to continue the investigation, let the former Attorney General complete her testimony, and call the full list of top government officials that she says pressured her so that they could be questioned under oath. The Prime Minister sent in his majority members and shut down the investigation to make sure the truth would not come to light. And we know that the justifications that they have given for all of these cover-ups, and scandals make no sense. They claimed it was all about jobs. The Prime Minister claimed that the headquarters of the company would leave immediately if the Attorney General did not interfere and shelve the charges. But we now know that's impossible. The company must stay headquartered in Montreal on the basis of a $1.5 billion loan agreement with the Quebec pension plan. We also know that SNC is responsible for the 5 biggest construction projects in Canada worth $52 billion, which physically can only be done here in Canada. You can't have a rail transit system for the city of Ottawa built in London, England, or in Beijing and then dropped out of a helicopter onto the nation's capital. It obviously has to be done here, and therefore the jobs not only are going nowhere, but can go nowhere. And furthermore, we know that the public procurement minister is working on an exemption so that even if the company gets convicted, it will still be allowed to bid on federal contracts. So this is not about jobs. This is about protecting corporate cronies of this Prime Minister. And today, he carried out another abuse of power. His first was when he tried to interfere with the justice system, and today he interfered with the Justice Committee to shut down the investigation and cover up what is to behold. Yes.
Before I go back to the member, I want to refer him to House of Commons Procedure and Practice, Bosque and Gagnon, 3rd edition, which at page 902 says, following the budget speech, the Speaker recognizes a representative of the official opposition, usually the finance critic, who after a brief speech moves the adjournment of the debate, which is then deemed adopted. In doing so, that member reserves the right to speak first when debate on the motion resumes at a subsequent sitting. The Speaker then adjourns the House until the next sitting day. And so can I presume that this member will be wrapping up quickly?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for that polite reminder. And I will indeed wrap up very quickly, to the great dismay of the many supporters I have around me today, anxious to listen to me continue. But the reality is this. This Prime Minister is spending $41 billion in brand new spending to drown out the corruption scandal of SNC-Lavalin. Money that he will pay for if he is reelected through massive tax increases. This is the same strategy that Kathleen Wynne, whose advisor, of course, was Gerald Butts, imposed on Ontario. It is not new to this Prime Minister to do such things. After all, he's raised taxes before on Canadian families. He's covered up the true cost of his carbon tax, and he's running out of other people's money. this latest spending splurge will cost Canadian taxpayers a fortune. He knows a lot about a fortune. He inherited one. But most Canadians don't, so they can't afford higher taxes. So we, in conclusion, as the official opposition, will champion amendments to this budget, which will require the government live within its means, leave more in people's pockets, make life more affordable, and let Canadians get ahead. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the honourable member for Perth Wellington, that the debate be now adjourned. Thank you.
Where's the Mr. Poilievre, seconded by Mr. Nader, moves that the debate be now adjourned. Pursuant to Standing Order 83-2, the motion is deemed adopted and the House stands adjourned until tomorrow at 2 p.m.